Hello and welcome to the Moving Pathways Forward podcast series. Your host for today's podcast is Judith Allen Press, Principal Scientist at Apt Associates and Director of Technical Assistance for the Moving Pathways Forward project. Our featured guest today is Dr. Burt Barnow, Amsterdam Professor of Public Service at the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at George Washington University. Dr. Barnow will offer guidance on designing evaluation components to measure outcomes of a career pathways program.
Good morning, Burt. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and we are going to talk this morning about the implications of evaluation for the design and implementation of career pathways programs. You've been working on several evaluations of career pathways funded by the U.S. Departments of Labor and Health and Human Services. And I'd like to start by asking you to comment on what steps need to be taken in planning for using a career pathways approach.
Well, the first thing I would say in planning for using a career pathways approach is that you have to make sure you have a good program overall. So that means picking an appropriate curriculum, trying to make sure that you've done your homework, that the occupations you're training for are really in demand, trying to get employers involved so that they actually might hire the people who successfully complete the program, things like that. That's one thing. The second thing is to have in place a good plan for tracking the program. You need to do that before. That means developing a logic model for the program, and I can talk more about that later if you ask. And then also having in place a plan to track the implementation of the program so you can see if it's going as planned or what changes take place.
So one of the characteristics of career pathways approaches is that they typically have more components of services than, say, a regular adult basic education program has had in the past. And because there are multiple components of services, it means that the service providers need to form partnerships with other providers because they will need to be doing referral out to those providers and the like. Talk a little bit more about what is a logic model and how can a logic model be helpful to a program provider in thinking about the range of services that might need to be provided and the kinds of connections that need to be in place.
Sure. A logic model is very simply a written statement of tracking what actually happens in the program or what's expected to happen. And typically you have the following types of components. You'd have what are the inputs into the model. That'll include the people that are served. That'll include the financial resources, the staff and personnel that are involved, things like that. The second stage in the logic model tracks the activities that are provided, and that's the guts of what the program does in terms of what kinds of education are going on, what kinds of training, and try to be as specific as possible when you develop the logic model so you can know what it is you're expecting to have happen. The third thing that's done in a logic model is that you track the outputs of the program. That's things that are produced, for example, completers of the program, people who take certain tests, attendance, things like that. And finally, you come up with what are the outcomes that the program's going to produce, and what is it you're looking for, and what are some of the negative things that might happen. So typically in an education setting, the outcomes that you'd be interested would include learning gains, achieving credentials that involve passing tests, and in many of these programs, employment and earnings would be key outcomes.
Right. So this is a vehicle, if you will, a logic model that a staff can use to sit down and actually draw out what they're doing and what their assumptions are that a set of services is going to lead after so much time for this type of an output for individuals, and then looking at how long it takes to get the outcomes. Have you seen where some of the assumptions that program developers make sometimes are not always held once you start to offer services?
Absolutely. That's very common. And that doesn't mean you did anything wrong necessarily. It just means that the world changes and you're not always sure how it's going to change. For example, if the economy changes, the kinds of people who show up for the program may be quite different. What it does mean is that you have to keep track of who you're serving and then reassess as you go along what are the services you're providing, what are the expectations you have when people get done, to try and make sure they're still appropriate. You may have to do some changes in terms of how you're serving people and what your expectations are if you get changes in who's served or who's coming in.
Great, thank you. So, Burt, our next topic will be to discuss the individual components of a career pathways approach and some considerations in thinking about those. Under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, adult basic education programs are being encouraged to serve a wider range of clients than they have in the past. And as these clients begin to enter programs, the ABE providers will need to think about the different kinds of services to provide and how they can be responsive to the different needs of clients. In thinking about the implementation research that you've done in career pathways, can you share with us some of the lessons learned about actually planning for services?
Yes, it's absolutely true that the services you're going to provide depend to a large extent on what the characteristics are of the people who come into the program. And there's two things that I think I heard in what you're saying. One is the characteristics of people coming in under the new program, the new law, may be somewhat different than they were before. And secondly, there may be a broader range of people. Those are two different issues, and both can be very important for how you plan your program. Having people who have different characteristics, for example, say more people who have not completed high school, might require you to have more remedial education available and than you might have had before if the level of education has changed. Secondly, the fact that you have more diversity can add challenges. When you're teaching a class, if you have a wide range of people with different abilities, different preparation, you may need to take that into account in terms of how you form work groups, how you have people work together, how you do the curriculum so that people with more preparation aren't bored while you are able to bring the other people up to speed. So keeping track of who those people are and adjusting as you go along, monitoring who's being served, how they're changing, and making sure you fine-tune the program to try to serve the needs of the people who come in is very important.
One of the patterns that we have found in examining career pathways programs to date in the adult basic education system is that many adults enter ABE without a clear idea about what their occupational interest is or necessarily knowledge about the post-secondary credentials that they may need to pursue particular jobs. Talk to us a little bit about what you have seen on the ground, if you will, in terms of career awareness and career planning and the importance of those functions.
Yes, that's an important issue, and it affects people at all levels. I think when I was in college, every time I would take a new course, I would cross one of the possible majors off my list until I was stuck with just my last course, which was in economics. But seriously, what happens in these programs is that people often don't know what they want to do, or they don't know what they have a good aptitude for. And so it's important to go through some career exploration before you start. That means doing an assessment of trying to make sure they have the right verbal and math skills for an occupation or are able to learn those skills while they're in the program. And second, whether they have the aptitude and interest to deal with it. Someone may be well prepared academically for a particular health career, but if they get into the setting of a hospital and they have to draw blood and that makes them faint, that's probably not the right field for them, and they should consider medical records or something like that.
One of the other issues in designing career pathways programs is that one is supposed to be very clear about the nature of the demand for the occupation in the regional area that you're serving. Again, with this increase in diversity of programs, what are some approaches to meet both the needs of the clients and the need to be responsive to the economic demands of the community.
This is a very important area. You don't want to train people for jobs that aren't there or that are expected to disappear quickly. And there are a number of things you can do. A number of local programs make use of what's now called real-time labor market information. They like to find out what are the openings that are there now. This is especially important for relatively short-term training, say 6 months to a year, or maybe at most 2 years, where the short-term demand is known much better than long-term demand, and you should be able to put people into occupations where there are actually jobs. So that's an important area. Secondly, you want to make sure that people are aware of what these different training programs are and that they actually have an interest. Third, you want to get employers involved in developing the training programs if you possibly can. They can possibly be involved in designing or at least approving the curriculum, talking about what the entry requirements are for the occupation and what characteristics people should have when they complete the program so that they're willing to hire them. Those are all key things to do when you're planning one of these programs.
So from the perspective of an adult basic education provider, then, they may not be actually designing and offering the occupational program themselves, but rather partnering with another service provider who does offer career and technical training. And so what I'm hearing you say is that it's really helpful, however, for the adult basic education provider to be aware of what the demands are for that occupational training program so that the basic skills instruction can be well aligned to what that next program is they're going to go to or in which they will enroll.
Right. It's important that they know the levels that are going to be required for people reading math and other areas. And sometimes they can increase participation in the programs by trying to do the math and reading skills in context with the occupation. That's one of the features of some of our programs that we know tends to get people more interested. They have a lot more motivation if they're reading things that are related to the careers they're planning on going into.
Thank you. Our final topic this morning, Burt, is to talk about the importance of tracking both the services that are provided and the outcomes of participants in career pathways programs. Give us your thoughts about that, please.
Yes, it's very important to do this kind of implementation analysis so that you can judge why the program's successful or not later. You may find that the program doesn't do as well as you had hoped it would do, and that could be because there was some change in how it was implemented or you received different types of participants than you had anticipated at the beginning. But if you monitor the program carefully, then as you go along, you'll have the ability to try and make changes to the program to fit the new circumstances. For example, as you mentioned earlier, Judy, the types of people who come into the programs under WIOA may be quite different from what we saw under the prior legislation. They may be more varied. They may have more or less preparation educationally. So we need to keep an eye on that and make adjustments to the activities that we do and what our expectations are for what the outcomes might be. So one analogy might be if you're given different ingredients for making a cake, for example, it may turn out that if you got a lot more meringue and less flour, for example, that maybe you should be making a souffle rather than a cake. That's fine. That's a nice outcome. I kind of like souffles. And so it's the kind of thing we need to pay attention to. So it's like the old saying about making lemonade if you're given lemons. Here we have to look at what's coming into the system, planning accordingly, making adjustments with the tracking system as we get the data, and then we'll get an outcome that's the best possible.
Great. Thanks very much, Burt. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Judy.
Thanks for listening today. We hope you'll tune in to all 4 of the podcasts in the Moving Pathways Forward series, accessible from the Links Ed LINCS-ED YouTube channel. For more resources on career pathways, as well as news about upcoming events, join us as a subscriber in the Career Pathways Exchange, a weekly email digest of the Moving Pathways Forward project.